Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. It's great to have you here. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today for our masterclass. Today, we are looking at Citrix Machine Creation Services on Azure 2022 tech updates as well. Today, we have with us Jeff Qiu, Zeljko Macanovic, Todd Qiu, and myself, Amber. Hi, everybody. I look after the marketing here at Ferroque. Jeff Qiu, prior to becoming a Citrix Senior Product Manager for MCS, was a senior field architect working with Citrix Consulting Services across Asia and North America over the last decade. Jeff has worked on some of the largest Citrix projects ever undertaken, along with some of the most extremely customized solutions, leveraging a vast scripting knowledge and development skills. Zeljko Macanovic is a leading expert on Citrix virtualization technologies, with over 3 decades of experience working with Citrix and Microsoft platforms. His expertise in project delivery, technical considerations, and customer knowledge in a diverse range of industries is invaluable. During his tenure at Citrix, Zeljko had sat on the CCAT board and contributed to the development of various Citrix consulting standards and methodology refinement. He remains a trusted and respected member of the Citrix technical community. And finally, Todd Qiu is the president of Ferroque Systems. His previous consulting company, GH Consulting, was acquired by Citrix in 2012, and he became the director of Citrix Consulting Services Canada. Todd joined Ferroque in 2020, and the company is now one of only 2 Platinum Plus partners in Canada. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hi.
Hey, thank you, Amber, for such a great intro.
Hey, how are you doing?
Nice meeting everyone here.
Awesome. So I ask you, what is Machine Creation Services? Citrix Machine Creation Services is a component of the Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop solution that is coupled within the delivery controller. Using application programming interfaces, or APIs, from the underlying hypervisor or cloud provider, MCS builds intelligent linked clones from a master image to provision multiple virtual desktops. The clone includes a differencing disk and an identity disk linked from the base disk. Machine Creation Services configures, starts, stops, and deletes virtual machines using the hypervisor APIs. MCS is a disk-based provisioning approach that works with major hypervisors and leading cloud platforms. So why MCS? Citrix Machine Creation Services offers a simplified approach for image management through the following features: simple to deploy and manage using Citrix Studio, technology embedded into core product and no additional infrastructure required, better suited for cloud provisioning, and ideal for both persistent and non-persistent workloads. On today's agenda, we're going to be taking a look at Machine Creation Services 101. We'll take a look at some use cases and experiences from the field, along with some common challenges, and finish with some technical updates. If you do have any questions along the way, we would love to hear from you. Please add them to the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them during our roundtable discussion at the end. I'm going to hand it over to Zeljko to get us started.
Thanks, Amber, for such a great intro, and thank you, everybody, for joining this webinar. So before we get into any deeper conversation, so let's quickly review how does MCS work. From the high level, the MCS workflow is kind of divided into 2 major phases, mastering and cloning. Mastering phase is responsible for converting a source image or source image into a mastered image. And there are 4 phases within mastering: profiling, consolidation, preparation, and finalization. The cloning process is responsible for creating new VMs from the mastered or gold image. And there are 2 phases for cloning: creation of the boot disk for each VM and creation of the identity disk. Now, if we start digging a little bit deeper into MCS process, we can see that to convert a VM, we need a snapshot. So once that snapshot is created, it could be created either manually or automatically. If it's created manually, then fine, we can use that snapshot for continuing our MCS process. Otherwise, the snapshot will be created automatically. Once we have a snapshot, the MCS itself will create a full copy of the disk. This is something we call get. I'm not going to say process because on the next slide, we go into the processing, and this is where it gets really interesting. So the next step is creation of the preparation VM. Once that preparation VM is created, MCS will attach the instruction disk. Now that we have an instruction disk attached, MCS can power prep VM and start the preparation process. Look at this preparation process, kind of depersonalization of the mastered image. Then the snapshot of the prep VM is created, prep VM is shut down, and instruction disk is deleted. The last step in this process is that the OS disk is detached and prep VM is deleted. If any one of you watched MCS process in your hypervisor, in your cloud, you can literally see these steps happening in your tasks. And now, once we finish this process phase, we're going into the output phase. So MCS replicates that snapshot to the last snapshot. So we're talking about several snapshots here. Let's remember, MCS will take the last snapshot, the snapshot of the prep machine, and then replicate across all the storage repositories, create the required ID disk in memory, and then starts creating the VMs that we have defined in the machine catalog with the ID and diff disks attached. I hope for everybody this was a very nice refresher of the MCS process. So over to you, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Zeljko. So yeah, another common questions like we ask a lot is when to use MCS, right? So since the topic today is like MCS in Azure, like so before we actually GA'd the PBS in Azure, so I would say like MCS is like the only choice to do a massive provisioning from Citrix in an official way. But still, I would like to highlight a few things that is what MCS is doing good, what's the value of using MCS. First, it's actually a native service provided by the Azure CVAD. So you don't have to have any extra infrastructures. You don't have to have another SQL instance or any database which adds on your top of the license fee. So it is a native feature. You can just use it. By default in the on-prem, it basically you can launch it directly from your domain delivery controller, right? And it can actually handle from small, medium to large use cases. So in compared to PBS, like you probably need a certain amount of target device to start like investigating like PBS. So MCS can start with 5 machines, 10 machines, so even to thousands of machines, right? Zeljko will talk about more use case from the field about using MCS. And another good thing about MCS is beyond this Azure thing, MCS almost support all the platforms existing today, like AWS, GCP, and a lot more coming, right? So we created a lot of plugins for different platforms, including old on-prem platform and most of those cloud platforms. And one other thing about MCS is, like, other than PBS, that can only create kind of a pod or say non-persistent type of catalog, MCS can be used to provision persistent catalogs as well. Like you can use that as an alternative way. Like normally you have to do like scripting or like doing sysprep for your like persistent machines. Using MCS, you can natively use a wizard to create like hundreds, thousands of persistent machine catalogs. That would be a good add on MCS. So for when you're not going to use MCS, so like I can probably think 2 exact scenarios that you probably don't want to use MCS or say MCS doesn't support. One is you have a physical machine that you want to provision to. Since a lot of, for example, in some schools or in some labs, you have those real like small like PCs that is a physical machine, but you want to provision to those machines. That you can only use PBS, right? That you cannot use MCS to work on physical like bare metal stuff. The other thing is like if you have a use case that requires a very precise per device version control, for example, this machine, I need to turn it to a previous version, a couple versions back. If you have to have that kind of a level control, then you probably won't want to use MCS. right? Those are the two situations where you probably not want to use MCS. Then we'll probably go let Zeljko to give more examples of what we learned from the field. Thanks.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. Thanks for this really good overview. So let's look at some examples or experiences from the field. We're going to take some of the use cases that I've been privy to, and I kind of picked different industries, different sizes, and then different challenges. So if we look it up into the first use case, that is a smaller healthcare provider in the US. They had about 1,000 users, a little bit less for the concurrency, 30 CVAD server OS VDAs, and about 20 or some applications. So our challenge there was, actually one of the biggest challenges there was all of their servers were built manually. So that is a challenge to keep the servers identical. You forget something, someone else forgets something. If more people are doing stuff on the server, they might drift out, and then limited staffing as everybody, as well as they actually moved the backend services to AWS, so introduced the long logon time. So what we did, actually look it up into their environment. We recommended the Citrix DAS solution, so we moved it to the Citrix Cloud. Forget about MCS now. We're only talking about we moved the control plane of on-premises to the Citrix Cloud. Then we put the resource location in AWS, and then we used MCS for image provisioning to keep the consistency between the server OS VDAs. So that's what we did for this customer. The next, and I picked this one because it was in the AWS. The next use case is a mutual holdings company, really fairly large. They had about 5,000 users. They're using Citrix, and about 100 Citrix server OS VDIs, 3,000 desktop OS VDAs, about over 400 applications. And then they are serving about 19 million clients in the US and Canada. So their requirement is, and they asked us, we want to remove our on-premise data center dependency. We want to get out of the data center business. We're doing something else. We're a mutual holdings company. We don't want to deal with the data center. They wanted to remove the dependency on the PVS and all that additional infrastructure, even though once we did this project, the PVS was actually available for Azure. And then they wanted to migrate from the server OS VDAs into the multi-session Windows 10 OS VDAs. So what we did is actually created a resource locations in Azure region, actually 2 regions to be specific. We did the MCS for provisioning of a multi-session and single session non-persistent desktops VDAs, and the benefit, they also needed some persistency. That's where we had to go MCS, because you can't do persistent otherwise unless you're using the native tools or MCS. And MCS seems to be a little bit easier to do the persistency within just creating the persistent VDAs. So the third experience from the field, or third use case that we actually did, was a very large telecommunication company, one of the big 3 in Canada. So they have over 20,000 users. And interestingly enough, they started the work from home initiative even before COVID began. It was 2019, I think, in the beginning of the even 2018 or 2019, something like that. It was, they wanted also to use the persistent desktop VDAs. So the biggest challenge that we had here is, well, how are we going to use the persistent, because that they were and still are PVS shop for their non-persistent or server workload OS. So what we did, we used on-premise locations, the 2 data centers that they had, and then put them into the Citrix DAS. That was another one I actually forgot. And then use the MCS for provisioning of the persistent desktop OS VDAs. I think on average they have anywhere between 12 and 15,000 concurrent users at any time using this solution. And this is actually this has been a very successful project for such a large scale of the project. So now, as you can see, we have used MCS across different industries, across different sizes. And there are always different challenges for every project we have, but some major challenges that we see across, there are some major challenges that we see across the board. One of these challenges is migration. Well, migration itself is moving from one place to another place. That's what we do with the migration. So all of these companies that I actually used as a use case were migrated to the Citrix DAS, or actually were used Citrix Cloud Services to provide them with the MCS experience. When it comes to the migration, you know what? You can always do it manually, but it takes time. It's a manual process. There is actually a very good tool, automatic configuration tool from Citrix. I have used it several times. It really works well when you want to do your when you want to migrate your on-premise into the Citrix DAS, because that's usually what we see as a migration challenge, quote unquote, in these cases. Now, there are some other challenges, and then there is actually a very interesting one when it comes to the power status unknown that I'll let Jeff talk about, because he had some excellent experience with it.
Yeah, thanks, Zeljko. Yeah, exactly. Like when we do a lot of migrations, like we will run into issues, and just like Zeljko mentioned, we have this Citrix Automation Configuration Tool (ACT) that can help you to migrate from on-prem to the cloud, and you can also use that to do some configuration sync up from on-prem to cloud, even cloud to cloud. And from the latest version, you actually supports to migrate MCS catalogs, right? So that being said, so I would like to spend a little bit of time to talk about the in the on-prem environment. MCS, one of the biggest challenges, like, you know, we have a lot of VMware implementation with MCS in it. And one of the issues we met in the field is that, you know, from time to time to the evergreen project, you have to keep the VMware up to date, right? Then you have to upgrade the VMware, so upgrade the vCenter. So like we recommend in a lot of places in enterprise environments, in a lot of situations, we cannot really do it in-place upgrade, right? We sometimes have to do a parallel like upgrade path, which means you have to build a new like VMware cluster or new vCenter on the newer version. Then you have to move those machines from the old one to the new one. So that will very likely to lead to one type of issues we call the like power status unknown, or like the VM status were unknown. If you previously create that catalog in MCS, because we will record or say remember the VM UUID for VMware. But because you make such an upgrade or a migration from one vCenter to another, or from a storage to storage, so the VM that in VMware will be granted a new VM UUID. Even the machine and everything is the same. Even VMware say this is like a zero interruption that you just transparently merged. Then in your Citrix console, when you see from the studio, those machines will show as power status unknown. So you basically lost the power management of those machines. Even you can still see those on the vCenter well. So that is the well-known issue, because the VM UUID, or say the real VM ID, not the name or something, is actually get changed. So yeah, we actually is fully aware of this issue, and we get a lot of feedback from the field. So our engineering team actually created a script just trying to match those names and trying to get a new UUID and update the MCS catalog. So we actually will release a blog about that topic very soon, so help you to address such like unknown power status issues. That can, I hope that can help a lot of the company to better upgrade their or you can take it easier to just migrate the whole VMware to a newer version without have to recreate all your MCS catalogs. Okay. I'll give it back to Zeljko to talk. I think the next one is also, yeah, hydration, right? think that one's mine.
You can take over.
Yeah.
You can take over
Sure.
that one.
Hydration
You
one.
had such a good experience about that hydration. I love listening to you. I'm just gonna say that.
Thank you, Zeljko. So yeah, like Amber mentioned before, I move on to the PM side of the house. I was in the consulting for the last decades. So hydration issues happens when. So we all know that if you read the service license agreement really carefully, you will see if you create a disk or you copy a disk, for example, in Azure. So Microsoft only guarantees like within the first 24 hours, it will guarantee every bit of that disk you copied will be available, which means if we copy massive numbers of disks from one snapshot or say one master image, like what we do with MCS, at the very first, like one day when it's up, it is actually not guaranteed all the files or all the bits on that disk is readable. This is causing the hydration issue, which means like it will take some time for the machine to be really for the OS disk where we copy from one master to say 1,000 machines to be hydrated, right? The more disk you have, the problem get more serious. So in order to address that, we actually leverage the so-called shared image gallery. Previously known as shared image gallery, now it's known Azure computer gallery. So this method is basically we will try to divide the target device into smaller pods. Say if we have a catalog that we need to provision 1,000 machines. If before this technology use shared image gallery, we will have to copy that one master image into those 1,000 target machines, which the hydration time will be a lot longer. So with this shared image gallery feature, when you check that, default, it will implement a ratio of 1 to 20. So it means every 20 machine of your target machine will have one copy of the image. That basically you only copy one master image into 20 target machines. So it will help to accelerate the hydration of that OS disk into like less ratio, right? No longer 1 to 1,000. So that way, so the customer will expect those machines to be hydrated a lot quicker. So that hydration ratio can be adjusted as well. On the other side, for example, in AWS, we actually could do that in a slightly different method. AWS have the same issue, so we actually developed a script that helped to try to touch every single executables in Windows, for example, system32 folders. So we're trying to touch those before the user is trying to running into it. So when those files get touched, it's help it to accelerate the hydration on AWS. Yeah. Okay, I will hand it back to Zeljko for some more like challenging discussions.
I so liked it when you said if you read that service agreement carefully. I don't know if anybody does that, but I know a long time ago, as you can see from my gray hair and almost no hair, we were forced to read those agreements, at least on the Citrix side. Another challenge that it gets really interesting, it's a catalog creation failure. So if you just do the Google catalog creation failure, you're going to see a lot of articles, a lot of Citrix discussions around that. So this one is fairly hard to troubleshoot. There are some logs and then event logs, installation logs that you can look it up and see if there's anything that's going to point you in the right direction. And if there are any recommendation that can apply based on the CTX articles that you can find when you Google it. But in any case, I would say don't spend way too much time on it. I personally would open up the Citrix case because once you go on a project, being an architect and consultant, being in consulting field, you don't have that much time when you have to finish the project. So you have to kind of get it done and working. And this is for regular on-prem installation or on-prem implementation of the MCS. When it comes to the Citrix DAS or Citrix Cloud, wow, that gets very interesting. You can't troubleshoot. You don't see the logs. You don't see anything. You get the pop-up on the screen. It says, "Hey, like catalog creation failed." I had some easy ones. Like one of the catalog creation failed was the last experience from the field. It actually said there is not enough. What was I can't remember exact resources, but it says not enough CPU. So I looked it up, and then turns out that the machine that we were actually trying, or Azure instance that we actually trying to use, was they didn't have enough in the data center, so they had to. I have no idea. We were okay 2 days after. I don't know if they kind of removed the limit or added the machines or whatever that is. But when it comes to the cloud, when it comes to the Citrix DAS, as I said, sometimes you can troubleshoot that. You can get where to go from that error on the screen, as I explained briefly. But most cases you will have to open up the Citrix ticket. Another interesting one is the GUI duplication. So we saw this with AVs, with some other software that it actually doesn't know what the non-persistent VDI is, and it creates, for example, machine identity that gets replicated across every single VM. I don't see this as much as I used to. This is really, I haven't seen this issue in quite some time, but just wanted to kind of let you be aware of those issues. Like, it could pop up from time to time. Some of the software is not designed to be used on the non-persistent VDIs. That's it. Just as I said, don't see it anymore as I used to, but just be aware of it, especially if you see some strange behavior, or AV guys, for example, coming after you. Why are you doing the same machine all over the place? That was the behavior previously on some of the AV vendors. So Jeff, if you want, you can take over for the platform-specific feature requirements.
Sure. Yeah, I actually have something to add for the catalog creation failure. So just like we mentioned, like Zeljko mentioned, so if it's since we moved to the cloud, so you don't directly have access to those DDC logs. So the best bet is you want to start a support case. So our first tier support can help you get some of those logs. So we'll have like always on CDF trace on all the DDCs in the cloud. So that can help to further diagnostic. So also we have some what we so-called distributed logs that can help analyze what happens at what time. And on the GUI duplication one, just one thing to point out as well. So remember, the MCS works slightly different than the PBS, because when you see your PBS image, the next time you boot it up, it's ready into the like read-only kind of scenarios. But MCS, because we have this mastering phase, it will have to go through a prep VM, which means the image you prepared will be opened once before it turns into the real master snapshot and public to users. So we're actually actively working on something to try to help to address this problem in a more general way. Okay, next we talk a little bit about the platform-specific feature requirement. As a PM, I get pinged a lot by different teams like SEs, TAMs from all kinds of the customers. So a lot of those have very specific questions to each platform. Say, for example, in Azure, we have Azure, say, diagnostics. We have Azure extensions that is on top of all these VMs. We have like host caching, disk caching that we want to turn on for all the target MCS machines, right? So there is really previously there's no way to add all these in a unified way, right? So we have to do that one at a time, like a patching, or in the past, we also used to use what is so-called custom properties, trying to add certain attributes on top of the MCS catalog, right? Then we decided that we need to find a unified way to address those for all the platforms. That leads to one of the new features I would like everybody to remember in the what's new section, that is called a machine profile. I will talk about that more in the machine profile section, but if there's one new feature you should remember after this webinar about MCS, that should be the machine profile. Okay, so I will move it to so some tech updates. So I will try to there's actually a lot of tech updates about MCS. I don't want to read them all. You can find what's new in the deck, but something I heard people feel interested into about Azure AD joint support, right? So two statements. First, about the pure Azure AD. So Citrix DAS supports to create pure Azure AD joint MCS catalog, including both persistent and non-persistent, single and multi-session windows, with Azure AD dynamic security group support in Azure only. which means like you cannot use that because this is like an Azure service feature, a pure AD join. For hybrid Azure AD join, Citrix DAS actually supports to create hybrid Azure AD join MCS catalog for both persistent, non-persistent, single and multiple session in all platforms, which means you can do that with, say, VMware, do it with Azure, AWS, GCP. You can do that on every machine. So those are the two current scenarios we fully supported for MCS. So more scenarios are coming, but like this is so far what we have. Now we'll talk about machine profile in the next slide. And another important feature is about the storage cost saving. So I think people nobody will refuse to like extra money, right? When you run on Azure, and if your machine is kind of a persistent one, we have a feature that can help you to do a lot of cost saving. So we'll talk about in the next few slides. And the last one, I think that is also important, is we begin to support modify MCS provision machines. This includes but not limited to the stuff I mentioned, like subnets and CPU and memory and hard disk. So we get a lot of requests for a couple of those. For example, for subnets, like the users may have a scenario where previously their like catalog only have, say, less than 200 machines. Then one C subnet that previously assigned will be enough. But then later on, they expand and expand. They find they actually need more subnet to be added to the same catalog because those are the same type of users, right? So they actually require the MCS catalog to change or modify the subnet settings for that. Previously, that cannot be done. So there's a new feature that we released recently that can support the subnet changing. So basically, you can change the subnet for that already existing catalog, and then after the change, the new machines you add to that catalog will be using that new subnets. And for CPU, memory, hard disk changes, so those are mostly asked when there's a persistent catalog. So for example, we have this VIP person that's complain about this being slow, so we want to give it like 12 CPUs and 32 gig of RAM and a couple of hundred TB hard disks, right? Previously for MCS, we don't actually really support to modify all these. Now we officially support the modify of that, so you can just add all the horsepower for the VIP persons. There's a lot more, like you can read what's new in the new release of our DAS in our public document. So then I will talk a little bit more about the machine profile and the storage cost saving. So as I previously mentioned, one of the challenges is different platforms have its own features. So we lack of a way of handling all these together. So machine profile is the solution. So like machine profile, you can basically think it is either you choose a VM or a kind of certain type of template spec, because each platform has its own name for template. In Azure, you call it ARM template spec. In AWS, you call lunch template. In other places, there's different names. So basically, the idea is during a normal setup wizard at the MCS, in one of the steps, once you select the VM, select the master image, select the SKU, there's a checkbox in the GUI you can see from the Web Studio that is called a machine profile. So when you check that, it will ask you to select a VM or a template spec. Currently, I think Azure, both Azure and AWS have, AWS probably not released yet, but it's coming soon. So every platform will follow the exact same pattern that we're trying to use a machine profile to set platform-specific features. So a lot of those, including, for example, tags, including disk caching, including diagnostics, extensions, all these will be using this kind of a template way. Basically, you provide a machine template or a machine that has all the information you need, but with other selections, like on the SKU side, you can choose different service offerings, you can choose different CPU memories, but you can use that machine as a template to attach all the features you want into this whole catalog. So this MCS catalog created will have all these features, right? There are some exceptions, so you'll see when you, for example, if you want to include some information that is machine per machine specific, if you have a, for example, GUID for that machine, or you have a certain extension that only applies to certain machines, then those won't be, we're trying to filter out those, right? There are also scenarios like certain machine profiles are not allowed during the change of that. You will see those error messages, but overall, you can use machine profile as a method trying to apply all these platform specific features. So it will. So when you select the machine profile, you are either to provide a VM or a VM template spec. So based on those inputs, we will try to apply all these settings into your target machines. And feel free to ask questions in the roundtable if you have any. Okay. So the next exciting news is about the storage cost saving. So, and as many of you know, like Azure allows you to switch storage tiers, which, for example, even on when the machine is switching status, right? For example, you have a high-performing like R&D team that needs the fastest possible use Ultra Disk or Premier SSD, right? Which costs you like a lot more, like 3-4 times than the normal HDD. You only need that when the machine is running, right? So when the machine shuts down, it actually allows you to switch the storage tier to a lower tier, especially for persistent machines, because in Azure, we do on-demand provisioning. For non-persistent machines, it's actually get destroyed every time and recreated every time you boot. But for persistent type of machines, so when I say persistent, it doesn't only stick to persistent catalog, because we have features for non-persistent machines to keep their OS disk as persistent, so you don't have to copy it every time if the user choose to, right? So for those type of persistent type of disks, now we have an option that we could choose to use a policy to switch that storage into a lower tier upon shutdown, like the lowest, for example, the standard HDD or something like that. Basically, that could save you a big amount of chunks if you are using such a scenario, like you have persistent catalog or you have a non-persistent catalog with some persistent OS disk or persistent write-back cache disk, then you can benefit from this new feature that on average, we did calculation among many different kind of a type of scenarios. Some are for example, from actually we said average is 30 to 50%, but literally, like if you are in a scenario where your VDA is always up, like in the hospital, it's a nurse station 24/7, then you basically have no cost saving because all your machines are on all the time. Then there's no chance you can switch to a lower tier. But in a normal, for example, developer situation or a day-to-day office worker, they only work like 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Then on all these shutdown time, your storage cost can be cut down into a lot lower to use a lower tier of storage. And based on the calculation on the storage side, you can save up to 30 to 50%, which is a big amount of money, right? I think that'll be, this is currently open tech preview item. So if you are interested, contact your Citrix salesperson, then we can request for the feature toggle to be turned down for your subscription. Okay, that's pretty much the most important things I want everybody to remember. There's more to come, but yeah, since we're not under NDA, so a lot of information I cannot really say here, but welcome to ping me if you have any specific questions. My email is just jeff.qiu@citrix.com. Thank you.
Awesome, great job, gentlemen. It was, thank you for taking the time to help build the PowerPoint and go over all those details. I think that there's a lot of value there. So I think that we do have a couple of questions. And Todd has got those in his hand. So I'm gonna hand things over to Todd.
Yep. All right, everybody hear me? I got question 1. How Citrix want to balance cloud and on-prem product features? We know that there's currently certain things that are not available or not available.
Yeah, I'll probably take that one. So
Yeah.
currently, like, yeah, Citrix, with the release of the universal license, we know that we now support to connect to cloud products from the on-prem as well, right? So I think that's under a lot of feedbacks from our major field customers. So a lot of customers want to or have to keep their on-prem existence. So that's why we actually trying to pair the feature set from the cloud into the on-prem environment. So basically, from now on, unless it's for example, the one I mentioned, the pure AAD join, it's an AD only policy, a feature. So we're trying to release all the features. Basically, all the features we develop currently is targeting for both on-prem and cloud from now on. So at least from provisioning side, that's what I can tell. But as a company-wide, I think it sounds like we want to keep both working towards ahead. Thanks. Yeah, Zeljko or Todd, anything to add? Or?
No, yeah, the last iteration of the CVAD that kind of closed it a little bit of the gap. We knew that all along that those two streams has to come into the. I can't say the common code because it's never going to be a common code, but at least from the feature parity, should be close.
Cool.
So I have another question. Is that when you do a migration from one VMware cluster to another, the probe scheme of the persistent machine catalog cannot be updated to the new cluster location. Is there a way to update this without recreating a new catalog and delivery group?
Zeljko, you wanna?
I can take that one because we had some situation that we had persistent. It wasn't on the same VM cluster, but it was in Azure. But there are some scripts that you can actually find that will remove that prob VM scheme. However, you end up when it comes to the dedicated, it really I would say stay away from that because it gets really ugly. Once you move those machines, then you have to remove that dependency. Then you have to move it into the different resource location, most likely. And then you can do it without recreating a catalog, but also you have to. So you also need to do like replication of the same machine. So you have one machine in one region or in one place, and you have to have that machine replicated in another place. I don't know if that's what you essentially want to do, to have a DR for the persistent ones. But again, it gets really ugly. But there are some scripts. I don't know, Jeff, if you know more about it, because I use that for a client. It really gets ugly.
Yeah, I have some other additional suggestions. So yeah, if could, like trying to keep away from the scenario like Zeljko mentioned, but also if you just want those machines to be power managed, one way is like you can export. There's when you delete a catalog, remember there's an option you can leave the VM on the hypervisor, right? So basically we call it forgot VM. So basically what you can do is you can delete that from your first vCenter and then import those VM back in your new vCenter as like a menu type of machines, which is only power managed on VMware. So you can re-import it. So the only caveat is today, if you directly do that, you will find in the new vCenter when you're trying to import, you cannot find it. That's because we actually add a tag called the provision scheme ID on every machine we created. But we currently are still working on something to trying to remove it when we delete it from that catalog. So before that feature was released, you actually had to manually or create a script to take off those tags before you import it back. So basically what you can do is you can delete those machines without delete the VM on the hypervisor in your original source location, then import it back into a menu type of catalog that is no longer MCS type, but you can still power manage it. That would be the closest I would say you can do with those that kind of situations.
And what I actually did was, again, it was for Azure, but again, it was remove those two attributes from the VM and then get them back. That's, as I said, it's ugly. It works, but it's really ugly, and you get with the persistent VM, power managed persistent VM. That's it.
Okay, good. So another one, I think it's the 8,000-pound elephant in the room, which is what is the company strategy now the cloud software group CSG the product strategy for keeping both MCS and PVS.
Oh, Jeff, that's your question.
Okay.
If you can do, I don't know if there is an NDA, you can talk about it. But
yeah, I can talk about what happened in the past and maybe what I know as a personal experience, but that doesn't represent Citrix or anyway, right? So we all know that many years ago, I think it's maybe 7-8 years ago, this rumor said, I think 2015, we said, we are going to abandon PBS. We want to only work on MCS. Actually, that didn't happen, right? We get a lot of feedbacks from the field that people really love PBS. So, and then I think there are a lot of reorganization happens, and the MCS actually now is, previously MCS was initially developed in the UK team. Right now, it's moved out to Berlin to move to US. It's in the same building. It's the same provision team in charge of both MCS and PBS. So far, I will see like companies putting efforts or investment money into both of the products. We are doing both at the same time. We didn't like doing less or more on this. As you can see, we just released the PBS in Azure last year, and now we are going to release PBS in GCP very soon. That I can say, and more platform is coming. So, and on the MCS side, of course, we are further like extend the support to support more like for example, IBM support is already out. So there's more to come. As you can see, we are actually doing both at the same time. We are not trying to abandon or merge. They all have its own benefits. Both technology will still exist based on my understanding. So that's probably my answer at the moment. Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. We'll look forward for new features and new things and new improvements coming up.
Great.
Awesome. So I think that's all the questions that we have today. I wanted to thank our panel members, Jeff and Zeljko, for joining us today. It's great to have you guys with us. Thank you to the audience for joining us. Please follow us on social media. We've got lots of great events happening. So I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you guys all next time. See you later.